Thanks again for coming out. I'm super excited to talk about Svelte today. I'm probably going to mispronounce Svelte a lot, so just bear with me. Part of my southern accent makes it really hard to pronounce those types of words, but just power through it with me. So what we're going to do today is we're going to really immerse ourselves with Svelte, and we won't be really diving too much into explaining why and what, but just how do you use it? How do you really take advantage of it, and try to walk everyone through an actual application, even though it'll be limited. But basically, we're going to build a weather application. That application will show the current weather and have a favorites page where you can add multiple locations that you want to watch the weather from. And we'll do a little modal dialogue. But, after this workshop, as you go through it, I encourage you to, continue to hack on it and continue to improve it. So there'll be little pieces that you may want to take on. And the reason for that is a lot of times learning things um, is comes in spaces, right? So you get introduced to something, and then you revisit again and again, and it'll start to make sense. So Svelte does a great job at an intro tutorial of just sort of giving you a tour of all of the features, and also has some great documentation that will point everyone to. But the purpose of this workshop is to kind of show you how you would use it, kind of a test drive, if you will, as you would be building it day in and day out. Um, so I've posted in the chat, but if you do get a chance, go ahead and get yourself an API key at weatherbit.io. I won't say that anymore, I promise. And they'll say that it's going to take a bit of time, but it should be fairly quick. At least that's been most everyone's experience with that site, that it is provisioned pretty quickly. Um, and we don't need it like right away. We'll get into it in kind of lesson um, 3 or 4. I can't remember. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to do this in kind of 3 kind of sessions. The first session, we're going to go over the basics of Svelte. The second session, we're going to get into, routing, transitions, and uh, stores. And then the third session, we're going to cover um, actions, actually build a modal dialogue, which will be fun, and then testing, which will be really cool. Um, and we're going to do that in like, kind of 40 to 50-minute blocks. So we'll go a bit and then have a 5-minute break. And then I'll review any questions and we'll go through those questions for 5 minutes and then we'll start the next session. So hopefully the flow will be smooth. And if you do get if you do get stuck, there's checkpoints, and we'll do some checkpoints along the way. And there's some instructions on how you can catch back up with each session. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. So the first thing we want to do is open a terminal and clone this repo, Svelte 101, 2020, 925, call it weather app or whatever you want, but just go ahead and clone that repo uh, and then CD into it, right? So you want to CD into that, back it up, CD in the weather app, and then just run yarn. And that'll make sure all your dependencies are installed and all that. And then once you get that, open up an editor. And as you're doing that, I'm going to kind of go through the kind of the project repository. So open up your editor, use VS Code, it'll be code dot whatever. And hopefully it won't take too long to install the dependencies. If you're not using Yarn, NPM will work, but I still find Yarn to be faster. And we're not going to go over how to create a Svelte project today. It's pretty easy to do that. In the notes, I've got a link here, and there's several different ways to do it. If you have different preferences, you may want to, kind of use a bundler like Webpack or Rollup, or there's a cool bundler out now, Byte, SVIT, based off of Byte from Vue, that gives you even a more modern kind of approach. So there's several different ways, and actually later on, I've got a video that I'm going to do that I'll just show you how to kind of build a Svelte project from scratch. So it'll explain kind of all the pieces that go together to assemble it. Because at the end of the day, Svelte is just a module that's a compiler with a very small runtime. So there's several different ways you can kind of pull it together. In this project, we're using Rollup, and in your root directory, you'll see this rollup config file. This rollup config file kind of defines how the projects are put together. And basically, you specify here's the input, here's the output, and you can see that the input is a main.js file, and then the output's going to a bundle file. And then we've got these plugins that Rollup uses to basically manage that build. So Svelte actually does the compiling of Svelte. So you'll name your files .svelte, and it will compile those into JavaScript classes to be you run in the browser. And then you've got this resolve plugin that actually resolves kind of the import naming conventions for Node and ES modules. Then you've got CommonJS, which will deal with any challenges with the Node ecosystem. And then a serve function that'll actually serve a web server, and then a live reload function that'll just give us kind of old school hot module reloading. So every time we make a change and save it, it'll refresh the browser. And then finally, if you marked it to go to production, it uses Cursor, which will minify your JavaScript. So that's the rollup config. And then the two directories to pay attention to is the public directory. The public directory has all of your web assets. So you have index.html, that's your container HTML page, and you'll see that it's got a a bundle CSS and a bundle JS file. And that is, that's pretty much all you need in your HTML file. You can put in all other stuff, but that's all you need to run Svelte. And then in the source directory is where all your source code lives. And you can see the main.js, the app Svelte file. And we went ahead and stubbed out some files that we're going to work on, some views and some components. And we've got a little helper library that'll help us make async calls, just save us some typing. All it does is wrap fetch. So that'll just save us some typing the fetch command out and handling the the response.json for us. So that's it. If you do prefer TypeScript, Svelte does now work with TypeScript, and you can run this script, set up TypeScript in your project, and it will configure everything for TypeScript. We won't be using TypeScript today, but it's good to be there. And there's a couple of other things in this particular project. We'll have a API folder, and that's got our endpoints for getting our weather. And we've got this data folder that holds a JSON file of countries, countries, which we can use to select countries for the weather API. Kind of just using the WeatherBit API straight, so there's not a lot of magic there. And then we've got this server.js file that's kind of serving everything for us. That's pretty much the project. One thing of note in the package JSON, I think this is kind of cool, is you have dev dependencies, and you'll see Svelte there as a dev dependency. It is not a regular dependency, and that's again because Svelte kind of compiles and gets out of the way. I think early on it was kind of called the disappearing framework, and it's really an interesting concept, and I think you're starting to see a lot of other frameworks starting to think about this: is what can we do up front before we deliver down to the browser to create a more optimized experience for the user, but continue to create an optimized experience for the developer as well. I think that's what Svelte really has going for it, is this really performant experience for the user, but yet a really awesome ergonomic experience for the developer. And that's what gets me excited about Svelte. So that's kind of the tour, the quick nickel tour, if you will, of the project. And hopefully everyone's got their editor up now. And what we'll go ahead and do is just open a terminal in your editor, or you can run it separately, and just go ahead and type yarn dev, and that should bring up our server and get it ready to go. And open a browser on port 5000, localhost port 5000, and hopefully you see a weather app. And we're done. That was quick. So basically what I went ahead and did was mocked up some pages. So again, we can minimize as much typing as possible and just kind of focus on the svelte characteristic. So hopefully that'll work out well. So once you run it and go to port 5000, you should see this current weather page. It's hard coded with an image and text, and it's got a link for favorites, which won't do anything. And it's got sort of these options to convert from Fahrenheit to Celsius. I'm going to go ahead and put my terminal but before I hide it, one thing to keep note, when you run it, you're going to see some warnings. And these warnings is one of the advantages of a compiler is it can provide warnings. If you've used TypeScript, one of the advantages of VS Code is, you have these warnings as you write code, and they can indicate things that may not be correct. And one of the things that Svelte built in is a simple checker on accessibility. So here, since we've got this mock-up, we're not necessarily having full accessible links here. And Svelte's just letting us know that an href attribute can't be empty. So you'll see those. But also, if you have a bug or a problem, this is a good place to check as well, because Svelte does identify some pretty good error messages, I think, when it compiles. And that's one of the advantages of being a compiler. So I think that's pretty cool. So as we get started, the first thing we're going to do is kind of go into current Svelte. Raining out there. And the first thing you'll notice is this looks just like an HTML page. It's just name.svelte. And actually, Svelte, one of the ways I like to describe it is that it's really designed from a developer's perspective to be very much like HTML. You can, kind of think of it as a superset of HTML. When you build a Svelte component, you're pretty much writing HTML. And in HTML, you could bring in styles via a link tag in the header, but you can also just add styles right there in the HTML file. And Svelte takes that semantic and creates a way to create styles in the component. And these styles are CSS that's specific just for this component. So these styles will style explicitly for this component. And if a child component is attached or a parent component consumes this, these styles will have no effect on those components, which is kind of cool. So, we can take an H3 and we can just give it a color of Rebecca purple. And if we save that, then that style happens for us, which is really neat. Also, with that same kind of paradigm, if we wanted to add code, instead of linking to a script file, we can just create a script file or a script tag. And we just type in a script tag, and we can write functions, declare variables, import, export stuff, all in this script tag, and it's localized to the component. So a Svelte component is a combination of markup, HTML, a style block, and a script block. And in this component, what we're going to do is we're going to simply create a constant in the script called weather. and we'll make it an object, and we'll give it a city, and just enter your favorite city and a state if you have a state, and temperature, and just enter in some static text. I think it's like 80 degrees here. And Fahrenheit. And then we're going to give it an icon. These are actually icons from the WeatherBit IO website. I just type in something for right now. And the description, it is raining here. It's definitely raining. I don't know if you guys can hear that thunder or not. So we've defined this variable, and now I said it's very much HTML-like. It's if you use template languages in the past, it is pretty much like handlebars. So you use these curly braces, and then you just type in your JavaScript expression, right? So I could type 1 plus 1 here, and it would evaluate to 2 and show 2 as the alt. So if we save this and inspect the image, um, that, we take a look at that image. There we go. You can see it shows 2 in there, not 1 plus 1. So it's a JavaScript expression. Any code that compiles and returns a value on to the left side of the equation will work um, uh, for for the curly braces in between the template. So in this case, we're going to want to take weather and pull in the description, weather dot description. And also, I don't have to give a whole URL. I can embed these curly braces right into a string and say weather dot icon, which is pretty cool. And then we'll change this to weather dot city, and this one to weather dot temp, and then finally our last one to weather dot description. And if you save that, now Svelte should take whatever we put in our code block and generate that on the page, and it does. It's showing Charleston, showing that it's raining, and you'll notice that it's showing our string and this ampersand degree symbol in HTML that converts to the little circle is not converting. And that's a function in Svelte. We can tell it to render a particular string as HTML. And all we have to do is just give it a prefix in the curly braces of HTML, and that's going to render that markup as HTML for us. It's pretty cool. One note, though, is that it doesn't do any sanitization. So you need to make sure that this is safe, or someone may try to inject a script on you. That wouldn't be cool. So you have to do that yourself, but it does give you a nice way to take an HTML string and provide it into your template. All right, so we've reached a checkpoint. So what we're going to do is open up the terminal, and we're going to Control C. hit this. Push function. Oh, you know what? I forgot to create a branch. Got to let myself check out. Okay, so create a new branch. Now we're going to get pushed to that branch. And then I'm going to check out a new branch. Okay, so as we go through this, if you do get stuck or lost, then you can easily just run git stash and then just pull the latest branch from origin. So paste that in the comments. So hopefully, you're able to follow along, but if you do get stuck, you can always catch back up by doing that command. Cool. So let's server. All right. So we just basically went through the template basics, a couple of things, curly braces for the when. You can write code in your script block, and anything you declare in your script block is visible in the component. And now what we're going to do is actually create a reusable component. And then we'll import it into current.svelte. So to create a component, we just create a new file, and we've already got a file in our components folder called weather. So we can just open that file up right here. And again, it's blank, but we basically can just start adding HTML to this component, and it's a component. That's all you've got to do. Now in this component, I am looking for a description variable, an icon, a city, and a temp. Again, I need to create a script block and declare all of those things. So I can declare them, icon, description, city, and temp. But in this component, I want to register or call this component from my weather component, and I want to pass props to it. So I need to export these local variables so that my parent component knows that I need to pass props to this local component or this component. So export in JavaScript is used a little differently, so it may feel weird, but with Svelte, you can use the export keyword to identify your props. And if you want to validate props at runtime, you can use this module prop types in your component, which is pretty easy to use. It came out of the React ecosystem. Or you could use TypeScript as well. And with the new TypeScript stuff, that would work as well. But in this case, we're exporting 3 variables in our weather component, and then we've basically got the same kind of template that we were using in current. So we're going to want to use that in our current component. So we'll switch back over to the current component, and just when you export something, your parent needs to import it. So we're going to import weather from, and we'll go to components, weather, and we have to use the .svelte extension. And with formal ES modules, uh, you want to start using extensions more and more because that's where things will start to move from this. Is it CommonJS? Is it Node? Is it the browser kind of mess that we're in right now? So it's good practice, but you want to use the extension. If you don't use .spelt, it's not going to know what file to grab. So we're going to do that. And then what we're going to do is come down here to our template, and we can get rid of all of that, and we can just add our weather component. And like with other frameworks, to specify a component, you type the capital letter of the component, and that lets Svelte know that it's not a native element, but it is a Svelte component that we're wanting to register. And if we go ahead and save that, we're going to get a bunch of undefineds because we haven't passed our values down to the child component, right? We define those properties, but we need to pass them down. And we can do that several different ways. One way is we could just say city equals weather.city. And then for each prop, we could go in and define that. If our variable was the same name as the property name, we could actually use a shorthand and just do curly braces city like that. And it would basically write out the city name equal to the city value. So that's kind of cool. And then the other thing we can do is we can do a spread. So we can add the three dots and spread an object over that, and every single key in that object will become a name value pair. So we can do that, and if we save that, should get back to where we were before, where we've got our descriptions and things like that. So that's really kind of cool. All right, so we're at another checkpoint, and yeah, okay. So we just went over the basic templates. We created a component and just showed you how to kind of pass props down to a component, which is pretty nice. One of the main kind of features of Svelte is its built-in reactivity. So just out of the box, when you have a local variable defined up in your script, it becomes reactive out of the box. So anytime, and I'll do a demo really quick. Let name equal world. So any time that you have something like that declared, and with a let, we can change it. So we can bind that to like an input box. This bind directive basically sets the value, and then it listens to on input event, and when the user changes it, it will set the variable. So we can bind value to name, and this is just to kind of demo the reactivity. And let's display that as well. Okay. So if you remember the old school Angular 1 demos, this is it. So, you can say raining, um, boo, whatever. And it's reactive. So anytime the input changes, the variable changes, and the presentation changes. So that's really cool. You get that by default, but there's also a way to create formulas. And those, if you use Excel, you have your, values, and then you can create a cell in Excel equals, cell one plus cell two. And then anytime a value changes in cell one or two, that formula will automatically calculate. So we're going to walk through that um, and basically handle this F and C up here and convert our values from Fahrenheit to Celsius and Celsius back to Fahrenheit. So to do that, to save some time, I pulled in a module called temperature, and we can just import that in, and it's got a couple of functions on it. It's got a Fahrenheit to Celsius and a Celsius to Fahrenheit function, and that'll help us do the conversions. And we're going to just declare a couple of variables for now to watch this in action. So we're going to declare a temp variable and a unit variable. And we're going to create a couple of handler functions to handle our conversion. So we'll create a function convert to F and a function convert to C. And in these functions, we're just going to, modify these local variables. So we're going to call Celsius to Fahrenheit and pass in the temp. And then we're going to change the unit to F. And then for the convert to Celsius, we're going to do the same thing. Fahrenheit to Celsius with the temp variable, change the unit to C. So these are handlers, and we're just going to add some listen events to our anchor tags here, F and C. And normally you wouldn't necessarily use anchor tags and do on clicks. Really you would want to use a button. But for this demonstration, I'm using anchor so that I didn't have to spend a lot of time with the CSS, and I can just make the CSS look okay. We're going to use a directive in Svelte called the on directive. And the on directive takes a colon, and then any event on an element or a custom event you can listen to. So in this case, we're going to listen to the click event. And we're clicking on Fahrenheit, so we want to call convert to Fahrenheit. And then for the Celsius, we want to do the same thing. We're going to do on click and convert to Celsius. So cool. If we save that, these should be working now. So if I click Celsius, it'll do Celsius. If I click Fahrenheit, it'll do Fahrenheit. Let's put a little piece of code here so we can kind of see what's going on. We'll just show the temp and the unit. Okay. So if I click Fahrenheit, it should convert to Fahrenheit. If I click Celsius, it'll convert to Celsius. And our display, because it's doing math, it showing a bunch of stuff, and we may want to round that. But we got some reactivity going. But like I said, we want to create an additional reactive element, very much like a formula in a spreadsheet. And the way that you do that with Svelte is you use this $: and that kind of indicates that you want to do something reactive. And it's actually valid JavaScript, even though Svelte doesn't have to be valid JavaScript because it's a compiler, but it's a label, and they're usually used in switches and while loops and things like that. So you probably haven't seen it too much in the wild, but with Svelte, basically what it does is it's going to create watchers on any variables on the right side of the equation. And when they change, it's going to update the left side. So in this case, we're going to create a display temp variable. And the nice thing with the $: is it actually declares it as a let variable for us. And then on the right side of the equal signs, we're going to give it our formula, right? So we're going to say, math.floor temp, and then we'll add the degree, and we'll add the unit, and go ahead and just convert that to uppercase. And just like that, we have a reactive kind of formula. So anytime the temp variable changes or the unit variable changes, this display is going to recalculate. And so we can just come down here in our presentation markup and just say, let's show display temp. And we've got it. Now we've got the same kind of challenge here. So we're going to make it HTML. Okay, cool. And now if we convert to Fahrenheit or convert to Celsius, works well. That's really cool. There's a lot of examples out there of reactivity. The traditional counter example where you can follow along, but really the sense with this reactivity is that you can create these Excel-like formulas that listens to all your values and then composes that into a derived value. A couple of things that you can do with this is that you can, add if blocks right in here. So you could say if, true or temp greater than 20 or something like that, then do stuff. So you can add an if block, or you can just add a code block. It's just the braces. And then anything in this code block that changes, it's going to execute the code block. So here we can just say console log temp, like that. And anytime temp changes, it's going to run a console log. So let's see how that works for console. So it initialized at 21. We go to Fahrenheit, changes to 71, 21. So that's pretty cool. That can be very useful when trying to debug what's going on with some of your components. And you may have other things that you might want to do as well. So another thing is with these directives, here we have on, we showed the bind directive too, then you have the, kind of the event that you're listening to. You can also pass modifiers. So when this event fires, it'll actually create an argument for this function of that event. And like if you were submitting forms or you wanted to stop propagating the event so something above it didn't catch it or whatever, you can call this event and say prevent default or whatever, and then do your code. But then a lot of times, that's super easy to forget sometimes. And with Svelte, they just add these little modifiers so you can just do prevent default or stop propagation or whatever. There's several little modifiers that you can just add, and it'll prevent the default functionality of a given event or stop um, propagation. I think I'm saying that right, etc. So that's pretty cool. Um, and it can save you some time. All right, so hopefully we touched on the reactivity of Svelte. We touched on how to use the on directive, showed a little bit of the bind directive, uh, and kind of created this conversion of Fahrenheit to Celsius. So we'll create a checkpoint. And create a new branch. All right. Just one more little checkpoint to go before we have a break. Um, I'm doing okay on time. So now that we've covered, kind of reactivity, let's jump into async. And async, again, you can call servers different ways, whether you want to use fetch or Axios, etc. We've got this API set up, and at this point, what we want to do is create a .env file in your local directory. So go ahead and create your .env file. And if you have gotten your API key, you want to just in that env file type weather underscore key, and then copy in your API key. Just like that, and save that .env file. And once you do that, you should be able to curl localhost, and I'll give you time to do it. But just while you're doing that, I'll show you. You can curl localhost and hit API weather, and then add, city argument, and type in Charleston, comma SC, and then a country argument, and just type in US, and that. There we go. Um, and you should be able to actually hit the WeatherBit API and get back a JSON result. And in this case, we've got a description of heavy rain and a temperature of 24.4 Celsius in Charleston. Hopefully that's accurate, but it was raining, but it's not raining right now. So it's not super accurate, but it may be raining somewhere in Charleston. Uh, so once you get that .env set up, what you're going to want to do is going to want to restart your server. So just go into your terminal and hit Control C, and type yarn dev again. And it should load up that .env file. And again, I'll paste this curl command in the chat. But basically, if I just open up a little terminal and do this curl command, you should get, you know, a payload. That's how you can make sure your API is working. All right, so we're gonna be back in our current Svelte file. And what we want to do is make a call out to our API and get some weather. We're gonna just import this library to get our JSON. So we're just going to import, get JSON, and pull it from our lib folder. That, and then let's just go ahead and in the script tag here, just call get JSON and then slash API weather city Charleston, Tennessee, country, and then let's just console log that. And if that works right, we should see, you know, our JSON here. We get the temperature and we get a bunch of other stuff, the city name, country, the state, and we get this little weather object too. And this weather object has an icon and a description. So we're going to want to kind of pluck those out of this object and send that to our weather component. Now, there's a couple ways you can do a sync on Svelte, and we'll go through both of them. The first one is on mount. So Svelte comes with some life cycle functions in import, on mount, on destroy, on before update, on after update. So on mount is when the component's being created. On destroy is when the component is being destroyed. And on before update is before an update is about to happen to a component. And on after update is when the update happened, right? So you can hook into those lifecycle events. We're going to hook into the on mount and put that down here. And basically, it's a function, and it takes a function as an argument. So we're going to put a function in, and we're going to copy this in time. We're going to essentially call our get JSON, and we'll make this a sync. And we're going to just hard code weather.charleston, and then we get those results, and then we're going to build our little weather object. And we're going to change this to a let so that we can override it. And now when we save, we should be actually getting the real weather report from Charleston, right? So we've got nice icon, the city, and the temperature in Celsius, and heavy rain. So that's pretty cool. Pretty easy to do. Might think, well, surely can't get better than that. But actually it does. There's another way you can do async, um, and it's a command in the template uh, called await, and we'll do that really quick. Um, so we can get rid of mount, and we'll go back to our template here. And what we'll do is we'll use the curly braces and use, I don't even know if there's a name for these commands, but there's three commands. There's an if, an each, and an await. And they are like template tags. So you start with a pound and then type the keyword, and then there's an expression that follows. And then that, just like an HTML tag, you've got to end that command. So you use a slash and a wait. And that is a svelte kind of template command. And this await actually looks for a promise, and then it gives you, kind of this place where you can sort of display loading while the async is happening. And when the promise resolves, it'll give you a then command, and then you can actually do a catch and then an end. So here we're going to create a function called getWeather. And that function is going to return a promise. So any function you call in this await needs to return a promise. And while that function is running, we're going to, kind of just display loading, right? And you can put your favorite spinner here or do whatever you want to do. And then we have a then, and like anything in here, the colon separates that. So if you had an if and an else, or each and an else, you can do that. And what we want it to do is, when it returns, is return weather, and this will declare a variable. So then we can feed it into the component, which is kind of nice. Um, so we got to build this get weather function, and again, I'm going to just copy it for time's sake, but it's pretty straightforward. Basically, it's a function that returns a promise, and is calling get JSON, and we get our results back, and we build our weather object where we have our temperature, our icon, our description, and our city from those results. And now we can get rid of this variable here. And if we save, we should be back to getting the weather. Pretty cool. So what I'm going to do now is just to show you, because my machine is so fast and this API is so fast that you can't see the loading step. So let's look at the loading step for a minute here. Let's return a new promise. Solve in there. And then that resolve, we're just going to do a set timeout and do it for a second. And then we're just going to put all this stuff in. I think that's right. We'll see. But basically what should happen is that, it should wait like a second or so, and then, kind of go. But I've got bug here. Resolve. Don't make that. There we go. Okay. So it's loading, and then I got to call resolve, right? Or it's not going to resolve. So here, the work. There we go. So refresh it. Should see loading for a second, and then it resolves. So um, the whole point of that was to just kind of show that it's pretty easy to handle the synchronous loading events in Svelte by just using this await block. And you can do loading, and if there's an error, you can actually do catch and get the error and handle the error. So you've got some nice semantics there, right, in the template language to deal with some of those things. Pretty cool. All right, I think we're at a checkpoint. So let me go ahead and commit. And what we'll do is go ahead and take a 5-minute break. So gotta take a break. We'll come back at 1:12. And 1:12, we'll spend a few minutes answering any questions that are in the chats, and then we'll get started on the next session. Check out a new branch. I think I'm like one session behind, but I think I'll catch up. So we'll go ahead and take a break, and then we'll come back and talk about each and dispatching events after we review some questions. So thanks again. See you in a few minutes. Okay, we'll get back at it, but I wanted you guys to see who was barking earlier. This is my buddy Ribbons. He's almost a year old in November, but he's my buddy here at the office of my house. So hopefully he won't bother us too much, but wanted you guys to check him out. Cool dog. Um, oh yeah, that's a great question, Brian. There's a extension in. There's a couple of extensions in VS Code, and the one that you should get is the Svelte for VS Code. Um, Especially if you want the access to the language server and plan to use TypeScript or even just get the benefits of TypeScript. This is the one you want to use, the Svelte for VS Code plugin. Sorry about that. Um, but it's pretty easy to install. Um, good. Okay, so now we're on each and dispatching events. And what we're going to do is work on the second page of this app, the favorites page. And we're going to list a couple of cities. So if we want to open up favorites.svelte, again, you'll kind of see just an HTML template, and we'll open up app.svelte as well and kind of switch over to use the favorites view. So if we look at the main.js file, it pulls in the app.svelte file. And in this case, we're just rendering the current component. We can change that to favorites, and it will render our favorites component. And in the next session, we'll talk about routing and how to route between components. But for now, we'll just pull up our favorites component so we can work on it a little bit. So if you go to your app.svelte file and then just on line 6, change current to favorites and save that, and you should be seeing your favorite screen. And we'll open the favorites file. Just like before, it's just HTML. We're going to add a script tag, and we're going to first just create an array of cities, and we'll say Charleston, New York, and San Francisco. Okay. So just like with the await directive, there's an each, and I always struggle. It's a template command. So there's an each command. So in the main underneath section, we can use that command just with curlies and then pound each, and then we give it a collection. So here we'll give it cities, and then we use the as keyword, and then whatever we want each item to be declared as a variable. So we'll type city, and then we'll just wrap that aside block and close the dot each, and then we can just in here reference that local variable city, just like that. And if we save that, we should get our list: Charleston, New York, and San Francisco, and it's no longer hard coded. So spell Charleston. So it's working. So just like that, we have this dynamic list, and what we want to do is kind of take this aside section here and actually create a component, and then we'll pass props down to that component. So we're going to go ahead and import city card. And then we'll bring in city card right here. So city card, we'll pass it the city prop. So we've got to define that. And basically what we want to do is take this markup here and copy it. And then we'll go into city card and we'll paste it. Okay. Save city card and save favorites. Error. And that error is probably because there's no reference defined for city. So like we did before, we need to export the, the property. So I want to create a script block and export let city. And then now we should get our cities back in business here. And one of the reasons that we're abstracting this out is we're going to actually work with events, and we're going to create a custom event in this city so that when a user clicks on this card, we'll notify the parent, hey, the city has changed, the current city has changed. So we're going to create a custom event, and we're just going to happen to call it click. But in order to do that with Svelte, basically we need to import this this function called create event dispatcher, and we'll just pull that in from Svelte. So really long name, and basically it's going to create a handler to create a dispatch function, an event dispatch function. So at the root of our script, we've got to call this function. You can't call it inside an on mount or inside any other function. You have to call it at the root. So we're going to create dispatch, and we're going to call create event dispatcher. That. And now what we can do is bind to our aside element. So we're going to say on click, and we're going to say handle quotes, handle click that. And so anytime someone clicks on one of these cards, then we're going to call this function handle click, and we'll just declare that in our script block up here. And then we're going to pass that up to the parent component. So to do that, we're going to say dispatch, and we're going to say click, and we could give it any kind of name. So this is a custom event, so we could say, change city or change or whatever we wanted to call it. And then we can give it some data. Here we're just going to give it the current city, like so. Now, the other thing you could do is, if you didn't want to create this function, is you could just do a side on click, and that would bubble up to the parent and not give it an equals, and it would bubble up as the click event of the card. But you have to be careful with that because you may have another on click event inside your same component. So you don't want it to get super confused. So either way, but this is to show you have to create an event dispatcher, then create your dispatch function, and then inside your functions you can call dispatch, and that'll pop the event back up to favorites. And then in favorites, just like we did earlier, we can just do an on click, and we can call like change city, current city. In our change current city function, right now, all we're going to do is just log to the console so we can kind of see it in action. So change current city, we'll take the city, and in this case, we're going to actually create a higher order function so that we can kind of capture the city as it's painting. So we'll take the city in, and then we'll return a function that will actually be the click handler, and then we'll console log city that. And so the way that we do that with the higher order function, as each block is painting each city, we're going to call this function and pass the city in so that we can take a closure and kind of put that in as a variable and then return this handler function, which will be set to the on click. So then when the user actually clicks it, we'll have a reference to the city, like so. And we won't be kind of reading it from the click event, but you can do both. I'm just showing you how you can do it as a higher order. So hopefully if that works, if I click on New York, I get New York. If I click on San Francisco, click on Charleston. So that's kind of cool. Basically you can, list out things with the each, and you can, you know, easily create custom events from your components and dispatching back up. All right, so that's another checkpoint. And that's events and each. Another thing to keep in mind with each is that it does have an else. So if there's no values, you can show a code block of no values. Show you how to do that, but it's just adding an else. It's pretty straightforward. So if your array was empty or there's no values on your display, you can just do an else. Just say no favorites. Um, and then if the array was empty or null, I think, or undefined, just plain no results. Let me run the server. Have to have a value. It's empty, say no favorite. That's the each else. Okay, so we took a break, reviewed some questions. Now routing. So there's no defined way to do routing in Svelte. Svelte has a sister project called Sapper that has code splitting, routing, server-side rendering, pretty much all of that. We'll be doing a future workshop on that, which really moves you from creating a small kind of single page app to a large application that splits the code effectively and gives you the performance of server side rendering first and then hydration, all that. But it has a kind of opinionated router there. There's a module called Routify that is also quite popular in the Svelte community. But what we're going to use is Page.js from it's an old project from the Vision Media TJ Holochuk from the Node.js ecosystem, and it works great. It's framework agnostic. It's pretty easy to use. It's got pretty much everything that I've always needed, so it's great for small projects, I think. And we're going to do that for a router for this workshop. Again, you could argue that you don't even need a router for this app, but I want to show you how routing works, and literally Svelte makes it easy to take any router and tie it in to the framework. So in order to do that, we're going to go over to our app.svelte file, and we're going to bring in the page.js module. It's already as a dependency in your package JSON, so we'll import that. And we're going to call it router, mainly because I want to use a page variable in my script block. So we're going to just call the page library router for the script block, and we'll declare a page variable, and then we'll create some routes. So we'll do router root, and we're going to navigate to current, and then we'll do router favorites, and we're going to navigate to favorites. And then we're going to go ahead and start our router. So we'll start. And we'll create this function, another higher order function, which is, kind of a function that can either take a function as an argument or return a function. In this case, we're going to return a function. So we're going to take a component as our argument, and then we're going to return a function that will take some context. And this context object would have some parameters, your query string, and those types of things. From the page routing system. And then all we have to do is take our page local variable and assign our component to it. And that's our little router. Now, when we get the new route, then we need a way to kind of tell Svelte to change it. So just like reactivity that we've done earlier, we're going to use this local page variable, and we're going to use a special Svelte kind of template helper. And these template helpers are basically like custom elements. So we've got, and they all start with the prefix spelt, and they have a colon, and this one's called component. And with the component, it has a this property. And we just set the this property to page. And what Svelte will do is every time this page value changes, then it's going to destroy the current component and create a new component for us. So with that, now we'll have routing, and it's pretty straightforward, easy to follow. Now, some of the things you may run into, like with the page router, which you can go to the GitHub page and see, it's very much like Express. So if you use Express in Node, be very familiar with it. But you could have like, widgets, ID, and it's going to put that ID into a parameter. And, what I've done is just declared params, and then in here, go params equals your context.params, and then just add that as a property on my Svelte component. And then if I export that on my page component, then I have access to those params, have access to that ID. So pretty easy to manage routing. The nav2 function, you don't have to use that. You could write a function for each one. It's the page router is got this little middleware piece. So if you wanted to do something between, and you can take another function here called next and do something and then call next, and it will just chain all of the functions. So again, very similar to Express. So you can have, F, Y, Z, just a whole pipeline of functions, and they would, as long as next was called, they would just work all the way down until next wasn't called anymore. Pretty cool. So that's the router. Now our pages are still not working yet because we got to look it up. So all we do to, navigate from our current page to our favorites page, all we need to do is add a hyperlink. So we go into current Svelte and we just find our favorites link and we just do /favorites. And if we save that, now we should navigate to favorites. And to go back, we want to navigate when we click on one of these cities, we want to navigate back to the current page. And again, that's pretty easy. We go into favorites, and in our function here where we're logging each city, we can essentially import page from page. And with the page, to do a redirect programmatically, all you call is page and then you give it the URL. And then it will do a redirect. So now every time I click a card, I should redirect back to my current view. And now we've got some routing. We still don't have the functionality working right, but we've got the path, right? So we can click favorites, select New York, and it goes to our current. So we've got kind of the flow working. And we've got another checkpoint. So that, and again, routing is one of those things. I think the Svelte community is talking about kind of taking the router out of Sapper and making that the official router, which is kind of file based. But there's Routify and there's some others. Again, depending on your project, you may need, a file-based router, which I would just say use Sapper or something like that. But if you're just creating a small prototype or a single page app, give Page a try. It's it's old school, but it works and it works really well. I think it's like 3 or 4K, so it doesn't hurt the download size at all. And yeah, worth checking out. So that's routing. And now we're going to talk about stores, and stores are kind of fun. Every app, I think, needs some sort of shared state in the app. There's several ways that you can do that with Svelte. You've got props, right? You can pass state from parent to its children. And then you've got events that can trickle bubble up values from the children to the parent. So that's very explicit. That can get very painful if you have a lot of components and you're passing a lot of data down and you got to get a lot of data back up. But it's certainly doable. And then there's context. So Svelte has context where you can pull in context and essentially set it. It's like a key value store. And again, I'm not really going to demo it because it is pretty simple. It's basically two functions. That's- There we go. Set context and get context. Um, with the one thing you have to keep straight with that is when you set the context, that's on the parent, and you set the value at that level, and then any of its children, any children that you import, can go and call get context with that key and get the value. Um, and that's, like I said, it's pretty easy. It's not reactive, but it's easy to do it. And but what I want to do is go through stores, which does have some reactivity to it. And if you ever worked with state management tools like a Redux or a MobX, I think you'll find this API pretty cool, and I think it's just really nice to work with. Um, so that's what we're going to do is we're going to look at stores. Um, and the other interesting thing with stores is you don't necessarily have to have a Svelte app to use it. You can actually use it with other frameworks as well. So what we're going to do is open a file up called store. I think we need to create that file. We need to create a new file, and we're going to do that on the source directory. We'll just create a new file and call it store.js. So just a new JavaScript file. And um, there's kind of three flavors of stores in Svelte. There's a writable store, a readable store, and a derived store. The writable store does what it says. You can write to it and you can read from it. The readable store is kind of read only, so you can't write to it. And that's kind of helpful for things like, if you're reading unchanged values from a WebSocket, or a favorite example is what if you wanted to detect if the user is online or offline, right? You could hook into the window event, and when it fires that the user is offline, you can create a readable store and make that reactive and show like a little offline sign, or a you know a toast that comes up and says, "Sorry, you're not online. This app's not going to be very helpful." But then the writable, you can do a lot of things. But mainly, I kind of think of it as state and state management. If I want to maintain if the user's logged in or not, or if I want to store something that I want to share across multiple components, whether it's on the same page or during transitions. Um, so we've got a little contrived example here, but I think it'll help you get an idea of how stores work. So we're going to import writable from Svelte store, and we're going to create a store, but we're going to also export it at the same time. So we're going to create the store by just calling writable and passing in a value. In this case, we're going to pass in an object with a current property, and then we're just going to give it our city. So we're going to say Charleston, South Carolina. That's our current value of our store. And then we're going to create a function that we're going to call dispatch. And this dispatch is very much like the Redux dispatch. So we're kind of creating like a mini Redux kind of state management tool with this store. But it's going to take an action, and it's just going to return a promise. And it's going to handle this resolve state. And so when I create a store, the shape of that has a couple of things. It has a subscribe method on it, and it has an update method and a set method. The set method is if you want to just set the value, right, straight out. So you would say store.set and give it the new value. The update method kind of works like a map function on an array. So it's kind of functional. The update method takes a function, and that function will actually have the value from the store as its first argument. Let's just call that state for now. And then what we're going to do is we're going to resolve this function. And then we're going to basically say if the action.type equals set current. Then what we want to do is return a new object, and whatever we return in this function will be set as the current value in the store. So we're going to return a new object of its state. We're going to just spread the state properties over it, and then add the current property, and that'll be action payload. So if we wanted to create a new city, we would call dispatch and pass it an object that had a type with a set current and a payload with the new city. And this if will basically update the store with that new state. Otherwise, if dispatch is called and the action is none of that, we just don't want to do anything, and we'll just return state. And that's our dispatch method. Don't think I have any errors in that. So what we're going to do is in our favorites handler, when we click the new city, we're actually going to dispatch that to the store, and it's going to replace this current value with the new city value. And then that'll allow us to read from the current component what the new current store is. So we'll open our favorites component, and in our change current city, we'll first import the store. So we'll import actually dispatch from store.js. And now what we'll do is we'll call dispatch, and we'll give it an action where our type is going to be set current, and our payload will be city. And it's going to return a promise, and that's why we did that promise in the store. So it'll return a promise, so we can do, a dot then, or we can make this a sync, and we can just do an await. And then when that promise returns, then we can do our redirect. So that's how we can kind of handle our redirect. So it's not going to redirect to current until our store has the actual value set in it, which is cool. We could also do a dot then instead of the sync away. Either way, several different ways to do this. So now, when we go into our favorites and we click on a city, it's actually setting the state. I'll go ahead. Also give me a warning about this unknown prop, which is good. I'm going to go ahead and just take that out because we don't really need it. So we've got our favorite. We're dispatching and saving our value in our store. Now we want to pop into the current component, and we want to read that value and react to it. So up at the top here, we just import our store from store.js. And when a store is called, I mentioned that it has three methods on it. It has the set method, the update method, and the subscribe method. So the subscribe method basically takes a function, and then every time something changes, that method is called. Um, uh, that function is called, that's passed into the subscribe method. Now, when you call the subscribe method, it returns an unsubscribe function that you need to handle. So if we wanted to implement this manually, we would do something like on mount, and then we would say, unsubscribe equal store.subscribe. And then it would have a function, and we would react to that and like set our local variables there. And then when we were done, we would do like an on destroy, because we don't want any memory leaks, and we would pass a function in there, and then we would call unsubscribe. But that's kind of a lot of work, and I'll tell you, it's easy to forget this unsubscribe, and then all of a sudden you've got a ton of memory leaks, and you don't know what's going on. So with Svelte, since it's a compiler, we can use some macros that makes this easier. And there's a macro that basically takes, if we take this property store and we put a $sign in front of it, what the Svelte compiler is going to do is it's going to automatically unwind that and create a subscribe handler and an unsubscribe handler, and it's going to do the right thing. So we can really just reference this reactive state by saying $store current, and it's going to pull the current state for us. And it's that simple, which is really cool. So in our get weather function here, we can just say, const current equals $store dot current. Now it's going to give us, the city, and the city's like got a capital C and may have a comma, may have all of this stuff, and we really need it to be all lowercase and no space between the comma for our API to work. Probably better ways to deal with this, but this works for now. So we'll just do, 2 lowercase, and we'll just do a replace, and we'll replace a comma space with just a comma, right? And that'll set our current value. And then we can use a template literal, just get JSON and replace our city right here with $, curly braces. That we close the template literal. And cool. So hopefully everything works, and we can test that by just going to our favorites and clicking on New York. And if everything works, we've got the weather of New York City. Go to favorites, click San Francisco. We got San Francisco, and we got Charleston. Pretty cool. It went from heavy rain to light rain. Pretty cool. So it is pretty accurate. So the neat thing about that is there is no hierarchy. All you have to do is import a store in any component. I would recommend, from an architecture standpoint, just to use it in your your logic components, and don't put it in your presentation component. So I kind of broke out the structure with two folders. You have your views and your components. And I would highly recommend that you use your stores like in your views, and then make these components very much a pure component, if you will. And when I say a pure component, it means that you're explicitly passing the data in, doing something with it, and you're always returning the same result back out as a component. And that will make these much more reusable, and it will make your life easier to deal with any kind of changes from a business rule perspective. So that's a recommendation, but the nice thing is this is reactive. So anytime, anywhere it changes, this will change in real time and react to it. So that's pretty cool. And it's real easy to hook into third-party libraries like RxJS because of the signature of the store is a subscribe function, an update function, and a set function. It's just super easy to hook into other libraries and give them all this kind of reactivity kind of functionality that manages state. So that's the stores. We're on a new checkpoint. And fit this. And now we're going to do something even more fun. We're going to do some transitions. Most frameworks, you have to kind of deal with these things, transitions on your own, or use a third-party library. Since Svelte is a compiler, it can have features like transitions and motion and animation, but it will only put those libraries or those modules in if you choose to use them. So the built-in transitions, they become in the box, but if you don't use them, they're not included in the final build. And then if you do use them, it includes them. And that's really kind of neat. So, it's got this motion library and animation library and all these other things, but if I'm not using them, it's not going to build it and send it down the wire. So it's able to have those kinds of things built in, and then you as the developer, don't have to go through a ton of third-party library research. You can just pull in the piece of the framework you need when you need it. So that's kind of nice. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to pull in some transitions and see if we can't make, these page transitions a little nicer. I'm no UX expert, so take it with a grain of salt, but it will be a little bit nicer than just going back and forth like that. I think. So we'll give it a shot. So there's several different kind of transitions built in. We're on current.svelte, and we're just going to import. We'll import fade. So we'll import fade from svelte transition like that. And in the template, you use these by basically specifying a couple of directives. And essentially, each transition is, do this transition coming in when the component's created, and do this transition coming out when the component's destroyed. If you want to do this transition for both in and out, and let's say for main, when it's created, we want to fade in, And when it's destroyed, we want to fade out. So we can just use the keyword transition and then use colon and give it fade. And if we don't give it anything else, it's going to keep the default. So by doing that, if I go to favorites, you saw it fade out, and now it should fade in. But it is still happening kind of fast, so we can kind of tweak that by specifying a template value with the first curly braces, and then the inner curly braces is just an object. So we're just passing an object in as the value, and we're going to use a keyword duration, and we're going to set that to like 1,000. I got a typo in my script in the notes, so there's the quotes in the wrong place. But basically, if you type it out like this, where you have your curly braces to say this is an expression of JavaScript, that expression is just a JavaScript object, and we're going to set a property on the object duration as a value of 1,000, and that should kind of slow down the fade in and fade out. So if we fade out, then we go and fade in. And there's other properties on here. We can put delays, we can do other things, and play around with that. So let's go ahead and go to favorites, and let's add another transition there. This is super fun because it's easy. You don't have to write all this CSS or keyframes or any of that. It's you just put a word and say, hey, I want this element to fade. That's super cool. Here we're going to add blur. There's another one built in. And what we want to do is we're going to actually, well, let's add it on main so you can see what happens. So we can add it to main, and we're going to just do it on the end. So when it's coming in, we're going to call blur, and we're going to say delay 1,000, and then a duration of 1,000. So what that's going to do is the current page will fade out, and this will wait 1,000, and then it's going to blur in. So let's see what that looks like. So if I click favorites, blurs in. But now if I click on New York, this one disappears, and then the current page fades in. But one thing that I noticed about this is as I click, see that favorites and add that kind of pops at the bottom? That's see if we can improve that a little bit. So what I did to improve it was move this transition in a root element above the main so that it kind of includes the nav as well. So just created a div. And in that div, we'll just add the blur, and then we'll wrap the entire kind of markup section in that div. And what that'll do is, in my opinion, give us a little bit nicer flow. We don't get that stuff on the bottom kind of coming up. So if we click on favorites, it kind of fades out, and then it blurs in. Then we go to New York, and that kind of fades in with the current page. One of the other things that was kind of fun was when we go to favorites, added a little animation on the cards or a transition on the card. So if we go to the card component, the city card component, we can also import a transition. So we'll import, fly, the fun one, from Svelte transition. And what we'll do is just on these cards, we'll just call in fly, and we're going to give it, we can have them fly in from the left or fly in from the right or fly in from the top or the bottom. Since these are vertically, we'll go in from the left. I think that'll look kind of cool. So all we do is just give it an X coordinate and say, kind of start minus 1,000 and do a duration of 1,000 and maybe delay for 500. Yeah. And you can play with all this stuff and get the right feel, but I think this is kind of cool. So let's give it a shot. Make sure I save. We go to favorites. I should show. Change this delay. That. So what it should have done is it should have just kind of flew those items in from the left. Let me try it again. Maybe I did something wrong here. Oh, there we go. So that's kind of cool. That again. And again, you can kind of play with the timing, but the nice thing about a single page app is you have full control of these transitions, and Svelte makes it extremely easy. You still got to work out the timing and figure out all the usability, but still to implement them, it's pretty easy. And if you want to go custom, you certainly can. And Spelt's got a motion tool and an animation tool where you can go full custom on there. But just the transitions are pretty cool and easy to do. So we're at a checkpoint. Um, I misspelled it. Okay, so we push that, and now we're going to check out 9. And this is a fun piece. So we're going to learn about actions, and we're going to create a little modal dialog. But first, before we do that, I think it's time to take a break. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll be back at 2:12. And then I'll review any questions, and then we'll get into modals and actions, and then wrap up with testing. So we're 2/3 of the way done. We've got 2 more sessions to go. So I'll see you in 5 minutes. We'll make it 2:13 now. I will see you at 2:13. Thanks. Okay. Notes. I don't see. It looks like everyone's question was figured out. Jerry was asking about the styles. Yeah, uh, caching. Disable your cache. Maybe that'll work. Um, Sorry about that. Looks like you got it figured out. Is everybody else doing okay? I assume you are. Um, so we've got 2 final lessons to go. And This one is a little bit involved. I think so it's really worth it. So there'll be a little bit of typing here, but I think it's pretty cool. And I'm going to try to step us through it. But basically, what we're going to do is create a modal component from scratch. Um, you know, and I'll try to show this demo of it. Um, so one of the things about like a modal component, and this one doesn't address all the edge cases, but it comes pretty close. So what we want to do is create this component, and we want to be able to just go in and basically say, let's see, where do I have it? Create this button, and just set open equal to true. That's hard to. So when we click the button, we're just going to set a variable open to true, and it's going to be reactive. And if open, then we're going to pop a modal. And that's super confusing to see. But basically, that's what we're going to do. So we, click open, and here's our dialog. And if you click off of it, it goes away. And if you click close, it goes away. And then the other thing, and we're going to use an action to solve this problem. If we show the modal, sometimes if you've shown these modals and you scroll on it can scroll behind the modal, right? And then when you close it, you're, like in a different spot. And you're like, how did I get there? That's kind of confusing. With this modal, we're going to use an action to actually disable overflow on the document, and then we'll re-enable it when the modal goes away. So I think that'll be kind of fun. Back. So we can close all of these tabs, and we'll restart our server. And then we're going to build this modal from scratch. So we'll open up, you know what? Before I do that, I think we added a file on the last branch. So I'm going to, here. And if you want that store file, I'll be glad to paste it in the comments. But restart our server. Okay. So we'll open a modal file, and I think I already got one defined. Yep. Cool. So empty file, and it's a component, and we want to make this component kind of a wrapper component. So it's going to take the markup as kind of a implicit prop, and then we're going to render that markup wrapped around this modal component. So let's go ahead and declare a script tag, and let's just go ahead and do our markup down here. Now I'm going to copy the styles because no one wants to watch me type CSS stuff. So we'll have just three basic styles. One is this div that's going to kind of capture the whole screen and put some transparency to kind of gray it out. And then the section element will be the actual, kind of modal. And then the aside will be kind of the card inside. So we're going to do a div and then a section and then an aside. And the way that you take children into a component, it follows the kind of the web component spec, and it uses this tag called a slot. And this slot will basically inject any children that I add in the parent component. So if I was to reference, this component modal like that, and um, anything that I put into the content area, like let's say H1 hello world, right? That content will actually go into this slot area. Now it can get more complicated than that. Like you can create name slots, and you could say slot name header, and then you could actually have multiple content blocks within your um, component window to place things multiple ways. But with us, all we need is just the slot. So the slot, that'll allow us to add, like the add form in at the view level, and make this component more generic and reusable. So that's pretty cool. And we want to handle, I'll do that later. Let's go ahead and implement our code. So in our code, we got to import, because import scale, which is another transition that gives us that fade, that fly, or that zoom in, zoom out kind of functionality. And we want that open variable, right? We're just going to tog a variable in the parent saying open true, and that's going to trigger the open. So we want to export that out. And what's cool is that I can export a local variable, and it's reactive from the parent. So anytime the parent changes it, my child component will react to that. And let's see. We won't implement the close handler yet. We may not need it, but what we do want to do is create an action. And when we create an action, basically it's just a function that gets called, and when it gets called, as the first argument will be the actual element node that the function, the action is declared on. And that'll make sense in a minute, but the important thing is this is just an HTML node, and you're kind of at this point in the DOM, right? You are in the DOM. The component has been created, and this is your window to do things that you would normally do in vanilla JavaScript land. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the document body, and we're going to grab the overflow style property of the document body. So we're going to do just a check here and see if the overflow is not equal to hidden. And then we're going to store the original value of the overflow so that we can set it back when we're done with our work. So we're tapping into the DOM, and we're saying, you know what, we're going to change the style of the body's overflow property to hidden. And this is just going to lock the body so that it can't scroll while our modal is showing. And then we're going to pop in this functions array a new function that um, body document.body style overflow equals original. Okay. So basically, this function array is going to hold a list of functions, and then when our action is done, when our component is destroyed, we want to map over that array and call all these functions. So these are all going to be kind of our exit handlers, and we're just using one, but this will give you an idea if you need to do more than one. You can just kind of throw them in this array and do all kinds of stuff in here, and then when the component is destroyed, unwind or remove anything from the action. So here we're going to map over all the functions, and then we're just going to call them. And what that'll do is it'll, when the component shows, it's going to fix the document so it can't move. And then when the component goes away, it's going to reset it back to whatever. There's another hook in here with actions called update. And whenever this component updates, that gets triggered. So this action kind of gives you a way to take a standard component and drill into the DOM for specific things, whether you're working with native elements, or maybe importing libraries like maps or D3 or things like that, and you can really go in and do some DOM manipulation without too much pain. So with that, in order to use this function, we just use the use directive followed by the colon, and then we give it the name of the function. And that's going to use it on this modal component like that. Then the last thing we need to do is use a template command, if. We haven't used if, and it's a pretty easy one, so we'll just say if open is true, then show the modal, otherwise hide it. And we've got our scale, so let's use our in and out scale on the actual card. So we're going to do in scale and out scale. We're going to set it equal to a duration of 500. And that'll give us that pop in and pop out kind of transition. And then one of the other things we can do is when we show the modal, if you kind of click around it, we can have it go away. Right here. Well, we'll do that in a minute because we may not want to do that. Either way. So let's just stick with this for right now, and let's see it in action. So we've got our modal component. Let's go into favorites where we want to react to it, and we're going to import our modal component into favorites. So we'll import modal from components modal.spelt. And let's just go ahead and declare a variable here, let open, and we'll say equals defaults. And what we want to do is define this modal on kind of the main section. So we can either put it here or put it down at the bottom, but we just want to define it on the root level. So we'll just do modal, and let's just stick something in there. Hello world. Okay, so if that works, then we should be able to come up here and just change this to true. And when it refreshes, our modal should pop. Oh, so we've got to pass the property to the component. That would be, and now our modal should pop. And okay, and if we change it to false, it should go away. Cool. So if we want to, kind of open it, we can just create a function. Open modal, right? So we can just create a function called open modal, and we'll just say open equals true. We could create a toggle function. So we could just say not open and call this toggle if we wanted to. Either way, let's stick with open and true right now. And then we can take this add element and on click and just call open modal. So now that's working right. We should be able to click this add and we get the modal. And we don't really have a way to shut it down right now, but that's okay. We can just refresh and it should go away for right now. So we've got our modal working. We still need to add the children content in, and we're going to use this add component that should be kind of specced out. So we can import this add component. So import add from dot add slash or dot slash add spelt. And then we'll just add that where we have this h1 hello world in our modal here. Add. And now if we pop it, we should get our add form. Cool. Go here and type it add and it goes away. So that's pretty cool. Cancel and it doesn't go away. Add, it goes. All right. So we've got a modal dialog working. Um, now we want to get our add component working. And what we want to do is essentially um, just like we, what we want to do is we click add, we type in a new city, hit add. We want to dispatch an event back to the parent that essentially adds a new city to this array, which will show on the list, hopefully fly in. Then we click that and we can see the current weather of that new city. And that's our goal here with this add component. So let's go into add component. And for homework, um, I will challenge you guys to do the country piece so that you can choose different countries in the app. But for now, we're just going to do city and state in the city, just because of time, really. And So we're going to comment that out, and we're going to go in our script, and we're going to import create event dispatcher because we want to tell the parent that, we added a new city so the parent can add it to its list. And we're going to create a dispatch function. And then we're going to create a variable city. So we've got a form. And what we want to do on that form is we want to handle the submit. So we want the user to input their city and click add, and then we handle the submit. So we're going to create a function to handle that submit event. And with that function, we're going to dispatch and add a custom add event and pass the city. And then we're going to clear text on the city. So just like we used on to bind with buttons and elements, we can use on again on the form, and the form has a submit event. So we can take the submit and we can actually pass the modifier prevent default so that we don't get the default behavior of a form, which is to make a post to the server. And then we can just give it the handle submit function. And now if we typed on that form, it's going to actually bubble up an event to the parent, and the parent would need to do an on to handle it. But we need a way to bind the value of the input of city to a local variable that we've declared up here, city. So that we use the bind directive, just like I showed in the demo earlier today, for the value property. We just set that to city, and that'll give us our two-way binding. So now when the submit's hooked, we can get access to the local variable city and dispatch that to our parent component. So that's our add guy. And now we go back into favorites. On our add component, we're going to say on add, and then we're going to add handler here called add city. And so we just need to define that function. Function add city. And when that function is called, it's going to give us an event. And in that event, it's going to have a detail property. So we can basically open that object and just get out the detail, because that's all that we're concerned about. And on that detail will be our city node. So when we call dispatch, this object becomes the detail object when the custom event fires. So we can grab that detail, and now we have access to the city, so we can append that to the city's list. And one of the things you may notice is that I'm using the spread operator to kind of append an item at the end by opening it up into an array and then adding the new value. To keep everything reactive, everything has to be immutable, right? So if I was to just do cities.push, then there's no way that Svelte would know that this array changed. So by reassigning it, because all the reactivity is geared towards assignment. So by reassigning it, that's going to help Svelte be reactive and react to that change. So then when I add that, it's going to tell this each command, hey, there's a new item. I need to pop that new item in here and add this city card component. So that's something worth remembering is that you want to treat all your assignments as immutable so that you can trigger the reactivity. If you just mutate things, then Svelte can't help you, and it's not going to work, and you're going to get frustrated. So the last thing we want to do is just kind of close the modal. So, all right, so let's see how we've got this going. If we click add, got our modal, let's enter Chicago, date, and hit add, and that flew in. And then if we click, we get the temperature of Chicago. Pretty cool. Go back to favorites, and it's gone. And that's because we're creating local state. If we had our cities in a store, then it would remember that we added the city. So that's another assignment I will pass to you to figure out. You've got the tools. We kind of went through this process. So to be able to add a store, you should be able to walk through the same steps that we did with the current and turn this local array into a store. And then you could even take it a step further and save it to local storage. So you could convert your store and have an initial state read from local storage, and then every time there's a change, write to local storage before you update your store, and that'll make it persistent for the user. And then if you took it to an API, you could actually create API endpoints, but that's for another time. So the last piece, we'll go ahead and set this as a checkpoint, but what we went through is we talked about actions, we implemented an action, and we created our own modal component that really kind of handles the basic needs that you may come across with a modal dialog, which is pretty cool. So let's go ahead and commit these changes. Make sure I didn't add anything else. And we'll hit our final lesson of the day, testing. And I'd like to shout out, and if Gleb's still on, a shout out to Gleb, who's VP of Engineering at Cyprus, and reached out when I announced this meeting to, check out Svelte unit testing for Cyprus, and checked it out, and it is awesome. I hope you guys will see this, but unit testing on the front end is kind of crazy. There's all kinds of ways to do it, whether it's running some sort of virtual or some kind of node fake DOM type of thing, or running Puppeteer or other tools. And I hope no one has to use Selenium anymore, because that's just not fun. But I was just blown away by Cyprus and the experience, and really want to, encourage everyone to check it out, because Cyprus has got this great end-to-end testing piece where you can do integration test and full end-to-end testing, and just incredible tooling. But what Gleb has done is kind of created this way to do unit tests with it. And anyway, it's definitely worth checking out. There's a couple of steps that we have to do to set it up, but it's nowhere near any more complex than other things. And Jest is cool, and the testing library is cool, but it's kitchen sink. Like, you're pulling all this in, and you don't get end-to-end testing. So If you want to build a robust production app, you're going to want end-to-end testing on the front end. You're going to want it to test multiple browsers, etc. So I really like the ability of having a powerful end-to-end system like Cypress be able to run some unit tests. And I think more and more as you build with component architectures, you're going to want to, test more integrations and, do some unit testing for things like this add dialog, for example, is what we'll do. But again, I think things are moving that way, and Cypress is definitely kind of paving the path in that direction. So with that, we're going to write a test. And so we're going to set up Cypress, and we're going to first, if I can move this up to the top, just a little bit bigger, maybe. Away. Okay. So the first thing we're going to want to do is install Cypress as a dependency, a development dependency. So we'll do Cypress, and we want to bring in the unit testing module, Cypress, Svelte, unit test. And then what we're going to do is we're going to initialize our project by running the Cypress application. And it's going to kind of create a Cypress folder for us, and it's going to add some integration tests, but really just set up our project to be Cypress ready. So we're going to do yarn run Cypress open, and you may not be able to see that Cypress screen open on my screen, but basically once it opens, it'll come up with a dialog. Yeah, okay, here. So it'll come up with a dialog, and it'll put some examples in there. You can just hit OK to that dialog, and then just close that for right now. And then what we're going to do is just for now remove the integration examples. So we're going to call the remove function and just say to do recursive enforce, and we're going to type Cypress integration examples, and we're just going to get rid of all of those examples so we're able to run just our test. And there's probably better ways to do it, but I know this way works for now, and it'll give us what we need. And there's a couple of things we need to kind of do to tell Cypress that we want to, that it needs to build these spelt components. So there's a couple of things we need to do in two files. The first file is in the plugins directory of Cypress. So if we see if I can close that, and if we open plugins index.js file, we just need to add 2 lines to this module exports function. And basically, we're going to say use rollup as a file processor. So we're going to create this file processor variable, or preprocessor. So processor. And then we're going to pull in, and when we installed the unit test module, it brought in this module as well. So we're going to pull in this Cypress rollup module. Okay. And then we're going to hook into the on function and basically set the preprocessor configuration. And we're going to just call this file preprocessor function. So those are the 2 lines we need for that plugin, and that's going to compile our Svelte files into JS when the tests are running. And then the next thing we need to do is in the Cypress JSON file, we need to just turn on experimental component testing and tell Cypress where our spec files will be. So experimental component testing true and component folder source and test files. So we're going to name our files the name of the component .spec and then .js. So we'll use spec.js, and I'm missing an asterisk. Okay, so this will search recursively through all the folders, and then any file that has a spec.js is going to say, oh, that's a test file. And that allows us to put our test side by side to each component, which is a nice pattern. Okay, so we've got that. Let's open up our terminal, and if we want to run this headless, just do yarn run cypress run. And what that's going to do is that's going to run Cypress, and it's going to give us a nice console output of what's going on. And what it'll do now is say there's no spec files, right? So it didn't do anything. So what we want to do is create a new file. And we're going to go into our views folder and create a new file called add.spec.js. So we're going to create a new file. We're going to call it add.spec.js. And this is going to be a unit test for our add dialog. But we're not going to test the modal. We're not going to test the favorites form. We're just going to test the add component. That's why it's a unit test. We just want to test that specific component, and we'll pass it everything it needs so that we can verify that it's working. So in this add spec file, the first thing we need to do is import the component we want to test. So we're going to want to test add, and we'll pull that from add.svelt. And then the second thing we want to do is import this mount function from the Cypress Svelte unit test library. Okay. And then with Cypress, and I might be wrong about this, but it kind of emulates the Mocha kind of syntax. So you have just cool. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up. All right, so we're working on our unit test, and we imported the add component, and we imported the mount function. Hang on. And so with Cypress, you can use the describe it kind of spec syntax, and we're just going to call the it function, and we're just going to give it a description, and then we give it a function, and then we want to mount our component. So we're going to mount the add component, and then we can do some stuff using the Cypress command. So use cy, and we can get like, and this is like a selector, and we can say, you know what, we want to get the input element, and then we're going to, in that input, type, Boston, Massachusetts. And then let's get the button. And I'll click. Okay. And so what that'll do is actually work. We can kind of save this and then go down here and run yarn run cypress run, and it should find our spec. It should grab the component and mount it, and actually type um, Boston, Massachusetts in it, and then click the add button. And since we're using a unit test and it only has one input and one button, that's all we need. So what's cool is Cypress creates a little video for us. So we can go to Cypress/videos, views, add spec, and open that up. And we can actually play what's going on. So here it's loading our test, and it actually entered the city and hit add. Super fast. That's so cool. So we've got that, but we're really not fully testing the happy path, right? Because we need to, the add component dispatches this add function. So what we want to do is capture that. And with the unit test, when we mount, we can pass props, or we can pass callbacks. So we pass this options object, and we're going to pass callbacks to the component. And the one callback is the custom event add. We want to capture that, and then we're going to stub it out as add. And what that does is that allows us to reference it in our test block here. So we can say sci.get and say at add. That's going to get that event, and we can do our assertion. So we can say, this should be called, and its first call args index 0 detail. So that's the custom event, right? So on the first call, the arguments, the first one, 0, position 0, its detail should, deep dot equal city Boston MA. Okay. So that's our assertion, right? So we set the input, and we click the button, and then we make an assertion to confirm that our unit test is passing at the happy path. So once we run this, it should get successful, because we know it's working. That's really cool. You can hook in. Let's run the video and see it in action. Doubt it'll be any more spectacular than the first time, but maybe. Cool. And you can see that all the tests pass, and if we want to, kind of make sure that it is truly working, just stick a Z in there and run it again. Oops. And it should fail. Now, maybe you're working on components where you don't just have one input and you don't just have one button. So this get works like a selector. So you can, go in your component and we got an ID of input, an ID of city in our input. So we can, use like a CSS selector and do um, pound input. So you can see that it fell below there. So we could say um, city, right? And it would find that. And the same thing with button. We could add a class or we could add an ID and it would find that. So that's pretty cool. And if you don't want to add things to your stuff, I think you can use like a test property um, as well, like a data attribute, so that it's just specific for test. Um, that's like a quick view of Cypress. Like I said, this is really, really great stuff. And to be able to unit test components using this kind of end-to-end framework is awesome. So I encourage you to play around with it and um, check out the documentation. In the notes, there's a link, why Cypress in a nutshell, and it goes through all the commands that you can do with Cypress. And it uses tools in the JS ecosystem or APIs like anything from Mocha or Sign-On or Chai. So you can get very clear and descriptive kind of assertions in there that read almost like English. So that's really cool. All right, so that's the final checkpoint. Let me get add everything, get commit, and get push origin testing.